Okay, here we go. This is part two of my lecture on Sojourner Truth. Um, so we're following the second set of slides on Sojourner Truth, and we land at a point where Sojourner was owned by this rather cruel master named John Dumont. And he, after a number of different, she was sold from place to place and ended up with John Dumont. Keep in mind, she's in upstate New York, rural New York, at a time when slavery was still legal in the North. But there was a time where, during Sojourner's time with Dumont, that the law had been passed and the time when the slaves in the North were to be freed. Now, Dumont knew that that time was coming, and so he told Sojourner, if you work really, really hard for me, I will consider at a particular time releasing you from slavery. Now, Sojourner said she worked her fingers to the bone. By this time, she had yet another infant, a baby girl. She, despite being a new mother, she's still working herself to death for this man. And when the time comes for him to release her, he comes up with a feeble excuse and says, "No, forget it. I can't release you. I'm not. You're still my slave." And so Sojourner became so frustrated and angry about this that she just one early morning she walked away. She took her infant daughter and walked off of his estate and traveled to a place where she had heard the people were kind. So she went to the Van Wagenen's home. Now, these people were pious Methodists, so they lived within the holiness tradition. So, and as you know from our study of John Wesley and Phoebe Palmer, they are within the holiness tradition. These people were deeply, deeply moral. They also had somewhat of a mystical type of relationship, I think, with Christ. And so they felt called to take in these runaway slaves from time to time. And so she appeared on their doorstep with her infant daughter, tired and hungry and exhausted, and they took her in. And around this time, Dumont figured out that she was missing and tracked her down and came after her. And the Van Wagenens really were touched by, at this point, Isabella Bonfrey's story, and so they offered to pay for her remaining time with Dumont, and they asked him how much it would cost to pay for her, to buy off her time, and Dumont wanted $20. So they gave him the $20, which, keep in mind, at that time, I'm sure was a huge amount of money. And he went away. He left Isabella, and she went on to work for the Van Wagenens in a much more free environment and in a very holy and pious environment. And so, Dumont, of course, was part of the Dutch Calvinist tradition, and so Isabella had grown up with a more structured religion, even though she had a relationship with God in her heart and had a prayer practice. Her outward religious concept was of this distant Calvinist God. And so she was less influenced by kind of a more African tradition of a more magical concept of God. But she was moving toward this concept of a caring, personal God. And the Van Wagenens really helped her in terms of the Methodist tradition to move toward that. She really helped to found the African segment of the Methodist Church, and it became a kind of Pentecostal-like environment, and she became part of the holiness movement. So yet she was still kind of assessing, does she really belong in this movement? what is her connection to her African roots? And this really came to a head for her when this celebration arose around the time of Pentecost, and it was called Pinkster, and it became Pinkster was had become a celebration of Pentecost, but it actually had become quite a carnival atmosphere for the slaves, and it was a revival that celebrated spiritual outpourings, but there was also, as Isabella perceived it, a more sinful element here, where there was smoking tobacco, there might have been some alcohol as part of this carnival-like celebration. And so she was really conflicted as to whether she was going to go to Pinkster or not go to Pinkster. She wanted to reunite with her African American friends, yet she wanted to return or stay true to her newfound holiness within the holiness movement. And it is at this juncture that Dumont comes back together, claiming that this the Van Wagenen's payment for her was insufficient, and he was still the rightful owner of her, and that she had to return to his estate. And needless to say, this was very, very bad news for Isabella. And so she is standing there. So Dumont is there with his carriage, waiting to load Isabella and her baby into the carriage and to take her back to his estate. And she's standing there, and in between her and Dumont's carriage, she perceives this this vision. And so let's read what she says. I'm now on slide 3. She says, but ere she reached the vehicle, she says that God revealed himself to her with all the suddenness of a flash of lightning, showing her in the twinkling of an eye that he was all over, that he pervaded the universe, and that there was no place where God was not. She became instantly conscious of her great sin in forgetting her almighty friend and ever-present help in time of trouble. Now, what this did for Isabella is it really begins to shape and change who she perceives herself to be. And she says, another such a look, I'm on slide 4 now, as she expressed it, and she felt she might be extinguished forever, even as one with the breath of his mouth blows out a lamp so that no spark remains. Now keep in mind, this is Julian of Norwich refers to this as reverent dread, this holy fear in the face of God. Well, Isabella, uses the word a dire dread of annihilation now seized her. So she's echoing mystical strains that run throughout, history, Christian history. She says a dire dread of annihilation now seized her, and she waited to see if by another look she was to be stricken from existence, swallowed up, even as the fire licketh up the oil with which it comes in contact. So this is all happening while, keep in mind, while Dumont's standing there at his carriage, waiting to load her into the carriage. And she's standing there having this mystical experience. And as she experiences this vision, she says, I know you, but she says, who are you? She exclaimed as the vision brightened into a form distinct, beaming with the beauty of holiness and radiant with love. She then said, audibly addressing the mysterious visitant, I know you, and I don't know you, meaning you seem perfectly familiar. I feel that you not only love me, but that you have always loved me. Yet I know you not, I cannot call you by name. And she goes on to say, when she said, I know you, the subject of the vision remained distinct and quiet. When she said, I don't know you, it moved restlessly about like agitated waters. So while she repeated without intermission, I know you, that the vision might remain, who are you, was the cry of her heart, and her whole soul was in one deep prayer that this heavenly personage might be revealed to her and remain with her. At length, after bending both soul and body with the intensity of this desire, till breath and strength seemed failing and she could maintain her position no longer, an answer came to her saying distinctly, "It is Jesus." "Yes," she responded, "it is Jesus." I think this is some of the most powerful, mystical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, writing that we have in the Christian tradition. And what is the upshot of this? Isabella learns that he had always loved her, but not only that, it changes her own conception of herself. So I'm going to go ahead and read because I think this is so important. Previous to these exercises of mind, she heard Jesus mentioned in reading or speaking, but had received from what she had heard no impression that he was anything other than an eminent man, like a Washington or a Lafayette. So she knows a little bit about American history. Now he appeared to her delighted mental vision as so mild, so good, and so lovely, so every way lovely. And he had loved her so much. And how strange that he had always loved her, and she had never known it. And how great a blessing he conferred in that he should stand between her and God was no longer a terror and a dread to her. Her heart was now full of joy and gladness as it had been of terror and at one time of despair. In the light of her great happiness, the world was clad in new beauty. The very air sparkled as with diamonds and was redolent of heaven. So what is taking place here? So what Joy Bostick envisions as this, what she sees happening here, is she says that up until this point, Isabella has been colonized. So as African-American womanist, feminist, and liberation theologians have employed the notion of colonization as a theologizing concept and category to explicate socially constructed relationships and ideologies of domination and subordination within the worldwide context of colonialism, post-colonialism, and patriarchy. So what Bostick is saying is that Isabella's very mind had been colonized by her masters, by the institution of slavery, by the way she was regarded within American society. What does this vision of Jesus do for her? It decolonized her. It absolutely removed this sense of colonization from her mind. She was able to reconceptualize herself as a free person, as a person who was loved, as a person who was a child of God. So, so from this point forward, so what miraculously happens is, as Dumont is standing there waiting for her and she's having this amazing mystical experience of Christ, Dumont regards a change in Isabella, realizes on some level that everything has changed about her, and he gets back in his carriage and drives away. And Isabella is at that point left with the Van Wagenens and is basically a free person. So from this point forward then, and here I'm on slide 9, Isabella regarded Jesus as a friend. She watched for the bodily appearance of Jesus. Jesus would appear to her. She felt she would know him, and when he came, she would go with him. And she wanted to dwell with him as with a dear friend. And so And not only that, but she experienced this lovely jealousy of her time with Jesus and her experience with Jesus. And she says it was not given to her to see that he loved any other. She thought if others came to know and love him as she did, she should be thrust aside and forgotten, being herself but a poor, ignorant slave with little to recommend her to his notice. And when she heard him spoken of, she said mentally, "What? Others know Jesus? I thought no one knew Jesus but me." And she felt a sort of jealousy lest she should be robbed of her newly found treasure. Now, this, interestingly, is also a very familiar theme that you see often with with women mystics throughout Christian history, particularly in the Middle Ages. What you can see is women like Hadvig of Antwerp, living 400 years, maybe even 500 years before Sojourner Truth, saying, "Jesus loves me best," and being very jealous of other people knowing or being loved by Jesus because she was convinced that Jesus alone loved her. There are other mystics throughout, the history that express this similar concern about Jesus loving others and feeling like Jesus can only love them. That's the type of love that we can experience from our Savior. And poor Isabella experiences this in such a deep and heart-wrenching way because her fear is not only that, her concern is that not only does Jesus, love her and love her alone, but that if others find out and come to love him, that he'll love them more and she'll be deprived of this great love that she has found. So I think that still speaks to this, difficult and colonized situation that she has been in all of her life, that she can't even fully trust that Jesus won't go on to love others more than he loves her. But she remains in this relationship with Jesus throughout her life. So how did these visions come into play for Isabella and then for other slaves? The visions allowed African American slaves to take part in an interactive communication from God. And this is coming from Joy Bostick's book, page 61. So they experienced a vision of the self that transcended the slave master's definitions of self. So it provided a critical lens through which these slaves could view the slavery establishment, and it allowed for a transformation and a re-engagement with the world in a completely different way. So Bostick confirms what I've been saying, which is that this vision of Christ allowed Sojourner to not only transcend and decolonize her own mind, but then it allowed her to go on and to go out and to help other African Americans to reconceptualize themselves and to help non-African, whites to reconceptualize the way they viewed African Americans in society. So on Pentecost of 1843, because Isabella has reconceptualized her mind, she decides that she's going to rename herself. She actually believes that God has renamed her. She names herself after God because the Van Wagenens have told her that God is truth. So she renames herself as Sojourner Truth, and she chooses the name of Sojourner because she decides that it's her calling to travel around, to be a sojourner, preaching the truth of God. And so she no longer uses her slave name as Isabella Baumfree. And so Isabella then Sojourner becomes a challenge to the status quo in the world. And she says, how came Jesus into the world? Through God, who created him and the woman who bore him. Now, this is an excerpt from the Ain't God a Woman speech. Ain't I a Woman speech that you can see that I included in your video, so I don't need to read this to you. This is slide number 13. So wrapping up, trying to get in under the 20-minute mark, this experience that Sojourner has completely transforms her own self-conception, and that allows her to transform herself, her relationship to God, and then go out and help to transform others. And so that's where I think the real value of mystical experience lies in our understanding of evangelicalism today, is this movement toward not only our reconceptualizing and having a new understanding of ourselves, but then it allows us to go out into the world and change the world. So that's my speech on Sojourner. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I look forward to your posts. I will I'll be speaking with you next week on Howard Thurman and Richard Foster, and we're going to wrap up. And I hope you're all thinking of your papers. Please email me if you have any questions. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye.